Hi there. Welcome, guests, Rouxbe students, past and present, essential vegan dessert students. And I'm so happy that we're going to join together for the next hour talking about Thanksgiving desserts and anything else that might come up. I really appreciate your being here with me today. What is this? It's almost Thanksgiving for sure, and we're having unseasonably warm weather in Philadelphia, and I'm sure in other places across the country. But I've got pumpkin, and I've got squashes, and I've got cranberries because the typical foods for Thanksgiving, or are they? That's really a question we're going to be addressing today. Just before we get to the topic, I want to remind my Rouxbe students, my essential vegan dessert students, and this would hold for anyone at Rouxbe who is studying with Rouxbe, issues of a technical nature. If you're having a problem that has to do with tech, simply write to support@rouxbe.com, and someone from our really fabulous team will get right back to you. I hear all the time how quickly questions are answered. For my essential vegan dessert students, if you have a task-related question, there is at the bottom of the page that you're on, let's say it's muffins, for example, or using aquafaba, click the question and support button. It's at the bottom of the page, and search your question because it may already have been asked and discussed. You can always add a follow-up as well. There's one other thing I want to remind my students about, and that is there is an opportunity to look at each assignment at other photos that other students have uploaded after they have sent off their assignments. And what you need to remember is follow the criteria that's being asked of you in the assignment. Don't go by the photos. Certainly look at them for inspiration, but there are a bunch of photos in there that are incorrect and you don't know how they were graded. So pay attention to the criteria. Everyone here, feel free to write to me at Fran@rouxbe.com. So students, if you have something that isn't a technical nature and just is, something you want to discuss, write to me at Fran@rouxbe.com. And anyone who is on the call with me today, please feel free to do the same. I want to get to the main course, which is Thanksgiving desserts. And I was thinking about I think about desserts for a holiday or a special occasion ahead of time. I start thinking about them ahead of time. And I was wondering about this topic based on questions that I get and based on my own personal experience with my family. And the question is, are Thanksgiving desserts best when they stick to tradition, or is it time or possible to shake things up with some practical twists or impractical twists or trends? And that's something that each one of us will have to decide for themselves, for sure. But Thanksgiving meal tends to be traditionally very large. So I think refreshing desserts served in smaller portions is a way to go, generally speaking. I will say at the outset that my family likes traditional food for our holidays. And that means our traditional holiday desserts are expected. So I do make them. I make the ones that I know the individuals in my family enjoy the most. And then I always add one or two that, with a spin. And I will tell you that how I came to that place was I had a year where I just decided, I'm not going to make a pumpkin pie. I'm not going to do a pecan pie. I'm just going to do some very different kind of desserts. And it didn't go over very well at all. People wanted what they want. What is traditional? You know, I think it really depends on your family. I have a friend who has a tradition after a particular holiday of having ice cream sundaes where other people are having bagels and cream cheese, for example. That's a tradition in her family. But I'm sticking with more traditional options this year. I'll be in Los Angeles with my son and his family. And so we will be making pumpkin pie because Michael likes pumpkin pie and it doesn't feel like Thanksgiving without it. For my daughter-in-law, it will be a gluten-free chocolate cake. It will be the chocolate cake to live for, but I always make a single layer, and hers will be gluten-free because she eats gluten-free. And I will put some cranberries, cooked cranberries or candied cranberries on top of the cake to bring in some of the tradition. I mean, what do we think about when we think about Thanksgiving desserts? And I would love you to tell me in the Q&A what some of your traditions are. So whatever it is that you decide to make, you've got to get started in a logical way because nobody wants the stress of making a holiday meal in a crazy way. And I know I spent years where I drove myself. I almost couldn't enjoy the meal because I was so tired. Those days are definitely over. We want to get organized. Mise en place, which Rouxbe students know, is the queen. Means everything in its place and prepped as needed. So nuts, walnuts and pecans and pumpkin seeds, for example, are often part of a Thanksgiving meal. Mine are roasted and cooled, so they're ready to go. If I need nut flour, if I haven't purchased it, I often make my own. It will be done, and I use blue tape and a Sharpie and a label everything, what it is in that container, and the date. I also think it's really important to think about your ingredients. If you want to look at your spices and make sure that you have what you need for your recipe, and make sure that they're fresh by having a little sniff. Spices don't last forever. I put in the chat a link to a live event I did with Ori Zohar, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Burlap and Barrel Spices, and it was very informative. These spices happen to be, and I'm not an affiliate, I just really like these spices. They happen to be, I would say, twice as strong as supermarket spices. And so I cut back by a half. Usually you can add more. It's hard or impossible to take away. And one thing about the warming spices that are associated with Thanksgiving, which would be, for the most part, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg. They are really wonderful and they work together, but you know that old thing that people say, too much of a good thing isn't a good thing. They can taste really bitter if you use too much. So add a little at a time and taste. If you're making something that's going to be served cold, maybe you're making ice cream for Thanksgiving, then you want it to be sweeter in its unfrozen form, in the liquid form, sweeter and punchier, because cold kind of tamps down the flavor profiles. I also extend mise en place to my pots and pans and dishes. And if you were with me, you would see that there are little labels in all of the pots and the serving platters and so on that I will be using. It's a really big time saver. And then you have to think about your practicality, about how you're going to make this meal. If you're going to bake a pie, that has to get baked in the oven, right? and a cake. The pie goes on the bottom rack, the cake goes on the top. Usually a pie bakes, certainly pie dough bakes at a higher temperature. So not everyone has 2 ovens. Think about what can be made ahead and what can be made in stages. I make what I call a game plan, and we actually use the game plan in Essential Vegan Desserts. So go ahead and inventory the ingredients that you're going to be needing to make desserts. For me, that's spices, agar powder or flakes, starches like organic cornstarch, tapioca starch, and arrowroot are the ones that I will use to make a slurry, to make a cream. Flours, all-purpose, whole wheat pastry flour, gluten-free flour mix, if that's something that you use. And for me, Thanksgiving, it's cornmeal, and I want my cornmeal to be fresh. When cornmeal has been stored too long or stored out of the refrigerator, it becomes rancid, and most of the time you can taste this bitterness. So that's what I do. Sweeteners, maple syrup, I use dark, I buy it in bulk. Sorghum, which is a cereal grass and has a kind of a molasses flavor that I like, and I really like date syrup too, rice syrup, and then, of course, pumpkins and squashes. So I'm going to show you in a little while a cream that I made up last night. Instead of using pumpkin, I love squash. I absolutely love squash. So this is what's left for me to have for dinner tonight. But I roasted a large butternut squash. And this would work with kabocha squash also, which is a very sweet squash. And I always want to have those around, and they last for a long time, so you can buy those ahead. Aquafaba, if I want to make meringue, maybe I don't want to use vegan marshmallows. The Dandies is a really nice brand. On the pie, because my son's pumpkin pie, and he's an adult, by the way, and a very good cook. He wants burnt marshmallows. Well, this year he might get marshmallows on one side and torched aquafaba on the other side. Nuts, as I said earlier, are a traditional part of Thanksgiving. And I always want to make sure that I have pecans, walnuts, and raw cashews, which I soak and use to make a cream of so many different things. All of the nuts that I buy are from shops with a quick turnover. I bring them home and put them in my freezer so they won't become rancid, and then I might roast them and cool them, but I never buy roasted nuts, even if it says roasted, no oil, and certainly not salted nuts. And then, of course, make sure you have your non-dairy milks and vegan butter if that's something you're going to be using, and oil if that's something you're going to be using. And so, think about, again, what is it that your family loves, and what do you feel comfortable making time-wise and space-wise? I have 2 ovens I can use, and I put them to good use. Now, I've been talking about pies, but there's lots of ways to think about pies. So I'm going to ask Patrick to show a couple of pie photos now. There's a traditional pie in a pie plate. And then, so making a pie, baking pie dough is really quite simple, but takes time because you don't want your pie dough to be tough. So you make it and then you let it chill, to rest, to tamp down the gluten. And then you roll it out and then you let it rest. And everything has to be cold. If you don't have pie plates or enough pie plates, you can think about making something that I call a galette. Other people call it a galette too. Some people call it a rustic tart. And it's just the same pie dough with the filling in the center, and the pie dough is folded over it. And it's a quicker, you still do the same thing with your pie dough. You still you make all your ingredients have to be chilled or ice cold, and the dough has to rest several times, but you're not fitting it into a pie plate. Now, also, there's something called a pandowdy. I don't know if any of you have heard about a pandowdy, but it's an early American dessert, so it would be very appropriate for Thanksgiving. I like an apple pandowdy. I will cook my apples ahead and then make pie dough. So you put the filling, which has been cooked and chilled, into like a 9 by 13 or any casserole dish that you have. Lay a piece of pie dough on top of it and then cut it and push it down. And that's called dowdying. And it's a nice way to make a pie without actually making a pie. I think another simple thing to do is think about bars instead of a pie. If you don't, there are people who have what I call fear of flaking, but we spend a whole unit in essential vegan desserts. I'm making really nice, quite simple vegan pie dough, and it works. But if maybe instead of making a pecan pie, you want to make pecan bars, you can use a pie dough, line the bottom of a dish, make your filling, and put it on top. So those are things that I think work. You might want to extend your pumpkin to pumpkin muffins. So these are really pretty. These came right out of my freezer. And look at this very pretty platter that it's on as a gift from Chef Char Nolan, which I really love. These two are have nothing on the top of them. And this third one was brushed with maple syrup, and some pumpkin seeds are on the top. And I would use something like a pumpkin to do, let me think. Oh, here it is. So I have in this dish, I have a biscuit. In our course, we do drop biscuits, which is super simple, super quick. And I happen to have a couple in the freezer. So I cut one, I put it in the bottom of this pretty dish. And this is a variation of the cashew cream that's in the course with less sugar added, and a piece, I pureed some of the squash that I showed you earlier and lightly spiced. And I think this might have become my very favorite thing. If I want to use this as a pie filling, I would set it up with agar and probably a starch slurry as well. But I'm thinking that I'm going to actually freeze this. I have a Ninja Creme and make pumpkin ice cream. And then on the top, I just cooked some cranberries. I have a freezer full of cranberries. I buy them when I see them, organic cranberries. And I cook them in maple syrup and water and orange juice. So maple syrup and water becomes like a simple syrup. It's not pure 100% just maple syrup. And this looks really good. And as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking a pumpkin muffin under here would be delicious. So would a pie dough. And if you want this to be your pie, you could roll out the dough, stamp out shapes, bake the shapes, and then put it on your pie. So there you have that. So think about your creams that you can use. And another thing is, when I was saying earlier that you might not have enough oven space, you're cooking your roast, whatever roast that your family is eating, and vegetables and things are in your oven. Well, you have a stove top, and we have in the course what's called a slump, which is it's a cooked fruit filling. This time of the year, I prefer pear and cranberry is my favorite, really, but pear and apple is nice too. You cook that, and then you make a super simple 1-bowl batter and just put dollops of the batter on top of the filling while it's hot. Cover it tightly because the biscuit topping is going to steam actually, and it'll cook on the top of the stove and can be made ahead of time, which is always a nice time saver. And of course, crisps and cobblers are good. If you want something fancy, let's look, well, fancy. What I mean is beautiful and something that will serve a crowd. Let's look at some trifles. And the trifles that you're going to see on the screen are actually student made, students in Essential Vegan Desserts, and this is their black box assignment. So what is in a trifle is typically some kind of a cake, cream, fruit, sauce, and garnish. Well, that's super easy to do using Thanksgiving flavors. And I have made this, and my family and friends have really, really liked it. I've made it with cranberry, with a cream like that, pumpkin cream with a whole bunch of stuff, pastry cream with some cinnamon, a little bit of clove. Delicious. And if you want to really gild the lily, you can put some aquafaba on the top and torch it. And another thing to consider is a ginger cream with a base of, made from a base of tofu. Patrick, do we have that video available to us? Okay, let's take a look at that. Because, you know,
to make this spicy ginger cream, first place the tofu into a pot of barely simmering water and blanch for a minute or 2. Once done, place the tofu into a food processor and puree until it is quite fine, scraping the sides as needed. Once the tofu is nice and fine, add the oil, sugar, syrup, ginger powder, as well as the juice, salt, and vanilla extract. Blend the mixture until smooth, stopping and scraping the sides as needed to ensure everything is evenly combined. Continue to blend the mixture until you reach a nice smooth consistency. Depending on your food processor, the final consistency will vary. For example, you can see how much smoother this cream is using this high-speed Blixer machine. To finish the cream, add the orange zest and mix to combine. This ginger cream can be used as a sauce with a variety of desserts, or it can be simply served with fresh fruit.
So that really is a lovely cream. There's not too much sweetener. Soy is a protein, and it happens to be something that I really love. If you're, you have to take into consideration the people you're going to be dining with. They may be soy avoiders. I haven't avoided soy for 35 years, and I'm just doing fine. I happen to love it. But you could think about, if soy is not something that is on your table, you could think about doing that with a nut cream, for example. So I have just talked quite a bit. I'm going to start answering some questions. I spy my friend and colleague, Charlene Nolan. If you are a Rouxbe student, you likely know Chef Char. She is fabulous. And tomorrow is Char's birthday, by the way. So let's see what Char wrote. Chef Fran, just a quick hello and congrats on your chef conference presentation at Drexel University. Hey, Char, thank you so much. That was so much fun. I think we have a really fun photo to show you. So Drexel University, Department of Food and Hospitality, excuse me, in Philadelphia. This was their 10th annual chef conference. And this year, to my delight, I was invited to do excuse me, a presentation of vegan desserts, and it was great. So you can see that I was having a good time. And the other woman in that photo is Dory Passon, who happens to be a Rouxbe plant-based professional graduate. And many, many years ago, I met Dory oh, so many years ago when I was still living in New York and teaching my vegan baking boot camp. We reconnected when she moved here. But thank you, Shar. It was really fun. All right, Maria, could you share some thoughts on a good go-to pie crust recipe? You bet, Maria. I hope that you were on. I know that sometimes people jump on and off during these live events, but we showed you a photo of the vegan pie crust, and it's the recipe that is taught in the course. What's different about it is this particular pie crust is made with 50% AP flour, 50% whole wheat pastry flour, not whole wheat flour, that's for bread. And it is not made with vegan butter, it's made with oil. And I chose that instead of teaching a butter crust because I just think there's more learning there. Everything has to be chilled. So you measure your flour. I weigh everything because it's just easier to scale up and down and be more precise. You use just actually for this 9-inch pie crust, it's just 4 tablespoons of oil. When you're subbing oil for butter, you use 3/4 of the amount because we don't have butter fat, which is part of the butter. So this is pure fat. 4 tablespoons of oil. That has to get mixed into the flour. The oil should be very cold. I like to keep it in the refrigerator or actually in the freezer for a little while and mix it lightly until the flour is really coated with the oil and you see irregular clumps. And then there is a certain amount of water that has vinegar in it, apple cider vinegar, and that is something else. Vinegar is going to keep the amount of gluten that is formed down. So the water you add just enough so that the dough isn't, can be rolled and not more. And then we let it rest again. So Maria, there are a bunch of good vegan pie crust recipes out there. I'm wondering if you're a pie baker. Go for it. And here's my friend Shar again. So Shar says, I'm looking to make some hermits. Those are cookies, yummy cookies, and I'd like to ice them. What are your suggestions? Ideally, not too much sugar. Well, certainly not. So hermits are spicy and they have nuts and they have raisins typically. Generally speaking, the icing on a hermit cookie would be like a confectioner's sugar icing, which is confectioner's sugar is powdered sugar with some amount of starch in the sugar that just to keep it from caking. I have noticed over time that non-organic confectioner's sugar, sometimes you see it as 10x, the starch will be cornstarch. You have to pay attention to that if you have people with corn allergies. And I only use cornstarch that is organic and non-GMO. And I'm sure that's the case for Chef Shar as well. And so confectioner's sugar and a small amount of milk, a plant milk, a juice, or even water will make that icing. I think, Shar, knowing you and what you like and hermits, I would powder some maple sugar very, very fine. So that means a blender, not a food processor. And if you're powdering a half a cup, I might add a half a teaspoon of cornstarch or tapioca starch. Organic confectioner's sugar tends to have tapioca starch in place of the cornstarch. And then add a very small amount of liquid, small amount at a time. It's always surprises me to this day, after so many years of making icing, how little liquid you need to make a glaze, like a confectioner's sugar glaze. And I think, Shar, I'd love to hear how that works out. And then, of course, you don't have to ice the whole cookie. You don't have to glaze the whole cookie. You can do a couple of lines on there, and that's all. So I would love to know. I'd like some feedback on that. Tell me how that works. But I think the maple sugar glaze would be really delicious. Hi, Michael. Michael wants to make an over-the-top flaky pie crust this Thanksgiving, and he's willing to give it a whirl. So, Michael, when you say you're willing to give it a whirl, and I'm hearing that you haven't made a pie crust before. I could be wrong. I would say read up on making pie dough and follow the steps. And again, that means your ingredients are cold. Even the flour can be cold. I work quickly, so generally speaking, my flour isn't cold. If you haven't done this before, you can use an equal amount of vegan butter. You don't want to use a vegan spread. It has to be a block or a stick. Cut it into small pieces, keep it very cold, and then cut it in. Follow the recipe for a good pie crust using vegan butter, or find an oil-based pie crust that you like. Let your pie crust rest. After you've made it, refrigerate it when it's just in a disc form. When you've rolled it out, put it back, let it chill again. Before you crimp it, then you crimp it, let it chill again, and then either fill it with your chosen filling or blind bake it if you're doing a filling that is already baked, cooked, or partially. And by blind baking, what I mean is you're pricking with a fork. I have something called a docker that looks like a medieval torture device, but I use a fork, make holes, and then you weight the dough, the raw dough down. I crumble up a piece of parchment paper and put some beans in and bake it. So good luck, Michael. And I'd love to know what kind of pie you're going to make. Hannah, oh, this is great. Hannah C is saying, should I make what I want for Thanksgiving dessert or make what my family expects? Traditional pumpkin pie. Well, that is really the conundrum that I was talking about earlier with my family, when one year I said, no pumpkin pie. I'm bored. I don't want pumpkin pie. And I made all the things I wanted. And my family was disappointed. So Hannah, this is really your call, but I would say, why don't you make your family's expected and probably much looked forward to pumpkin pie, and then make something else. So if you have the traditional things, the foods that are tradition to your family, and then add one or two new items in, that could be a way to go. So I want to tell you, I love cranberries. I absolutely love them. And I buy a lot this time of the year so I can keep them in the freezer and have them. I really believe in seasonal eating, but I like cranberries. And I make fresh cranberry sauces a couple different ways. On our table, there was always that cranberry gel from a can. My mother opened both ends of the can and then you pushed it out. I doubt that it tasted very good, but it is such a heartwarming memory for me. And now that my parents are no longer on this plane, that they have passed, I generally go and buy a can of cranberry jelly. I don't know, is that what it's called? Cranberry jelly in a can, and put it on the table just because it's a memory thing. So there is that. So good luck, Hannah. Feel free to let me know what you decide. Shante has an interesting question, and she says, pound cake requires a lot of eggs. I've been told it's difficult to replace eggs in some desserts. What's the best to use in a pound cake? So that is a huge question. Pound cake's an interesting. Pound cake actually was first recorded as a recipe in the mid 1700s. And the reason it's called pound cake, it was a pound of sugar, a pound of flour, a pound of eggs. It served a lot of people, and it was very heavy and very dense. And over time, it has been lightened up to be a more delicate cake, or maybe it's not so delicate, but less heavy. and it still has a very tight crumb. It's often baked in a loaf pan. Um, Egg replacement isn't something that is, and my students and my followers have heard me say this all the time, there is no one size fits all. So in a pound cake recipe, and I think the more modern ones certainly would have 4 eggs, that isn't something that I would try to make. I would make a vegan cake with a kind of a pound cake texture, meaning not quite as light as the vanilla cake in the course, something a little heavier. Um, some some people use, well, some of my cakes were, the egg replacement wasn't really an egg replacement because there were no commercial egg replacements. 30 years ago, nobody was talking about flax gel or chia or applesauce in cakes. So baking powder, baking soda, and vinegar, the depression cakes, only I used better ingredients and better technique, make a beautiful cake. The best egg replacer for a cake that you're trying to adapt would be, generally speaking, a combination. So you can go ahead and do a Google search for vegan pound cake and look at several different ones, and only look at recipes by reliable recipe developers, cookbook authors, and so on. There's a lot of really crazy stuff out there. And that's what I would say. I don't really have an answer on how to specifically make a pound cake. I know some people are using vegan sour cream or yogurt and some flax and some leaveners or chemical leaveners, baking powder and baking soda to make the pound cake. But I think it's absolutely doable. I generally don't try to make a cake where I'm subbing more than 2 eggs. There are very few things I haven't been able to adapt, but I'm certainly not making angel food cake, for example. I haven't seen anybody do that yet because that cake is 100% egg whites, is what's making the angel food cake rise. And Aquafaba isn't doing it. Thinking of angel food cake just jogged a Thanksgiving memory. So my mother wasn't a good cook, and she always said, go ahead and say it. But my mother-in-law is a fabulous cook and baker. I have some of her recipe cards. And one of her, I haven't thought about this tradition in a long time, but she made angel food cake. She might have bought it. And then she cut a channel inside of it and filled it with chocolate whipped cream. And that was our Thanksgiving dessert, actually, to tell you the truth. Anne is saying, when substituting cashew cream in a dessert, are we doing a disservice to our guests if we don't tell them how much more highly caloric it is than whipped cream? And that's a pretty interesting question. I don't serve a cake or a pie or a cream and say, oh my God, this has so many calories in it. It's dessert, and desserts are treats. What I would do is serve a smaller portion instead of a larger portion. And I haven't done the math to know that cashew cream is more caloric than whipped cream. I don't know about that. It seems like you may. But of course, how much? But what cashew cream has is it has nutrients, it has fiber. Whipped cream is all fat. It's heavy cream, it's fat. And cashew cream there's fat in nuts, there's fat in cashews, but we're talking about healthier. So, and there are reliable sources saying that the fiber in nuts is going to help you digest your food differently, help the fat hit your system differently. So I don't know. You have to decide. I would serve the cashew cream smaller portion of it and not worry about it. Or maybe you have someone sitting around your table who doesn't want any. Oh, here we go. I put a link to the Essential Vegan Desserts live event about spices in the chat. Sue has a question about a big onion that starts sprouting green shoots on the top. Is it okay to cut around the shoots and use the rest in soups, etc.? Yes, it is, Sue. I double checked on this. You know, if you have if you see a lot of eyes and things growing out of your potato, that can be a problem. What will happen if your onion starts sprouting is your onion is likely going to be softer, so it won't be something that you would want to use raw, but in soups and stews and, you know, in cooked applications, it'll be fine. I know that some people eat those green sprouts as well. They don't taste like scallions, but they're perfectly fine. And Michael B., who I think was Michael, this might be the same Michael who wanted to make a flaky pie crust, is asking what pairs well with a ginger snap crust. So ginger snap crust is a cookie crust, and I certainly like the flavor. I want to show you, this is a book that I use pretty regularly. It's the Vegetarian Flavor Bible, and it gives you really good advice on pairing what pairs with what. So you might want to look at that, Michael. With ginger snap crust, I know a lot of people like cheesecake with that, or lemony things, chocolate. I think anything pairs well with a ginger snap crust because I think they're delicious. Mary is asking, Mary says, just a minute, I just have to scroll. Oh, Melissa says, happy birthday, Chef Shar. So Adam O says, my family loves sweet potato casserole. I would love to have a plant-based marshmallow topping. What's a good sub? I've heard of aquafaba, but not sure how to make it. Adam, who doesn't love sweet potato casserole? First of all, I don't know where you are in the world, but there are vegan marshmallows available that are delicious, and you should be able to find them where you are. The brand is Dandies, Dandies. They come small, they come really large now too. So you could certainly do that. Aquafaba is like, I love to make aquafaba. It's just fun. So, and this is one of the assignments in the course, is to whip aquafaba and make a baked Alaska. So if you're using aquafaba, if there's anybody here who doesn't know what it is, it's essentially chickpea liquid. It's the liquid that chickpeas were cooked in. If you're using a can of chickpeas, you drain it. Every can's a little different. We reduce it by about a third to a half a cup, chill it, and then whip it as you would egg whites with a little bit of cream of tartar, the acid, and then start adding sugar. And unlike whipping egg whites, you don't really have to worry about over whipping aquafaba. Every time I say that, I get a little nervous because, you know, never say never, but it takes a while to whip, and it's really fabulous, really fabulous. If, you know, I've got some photos and information about making aquafaba on my Instagram page, so you can take a look at Good Cakes Fran if you are on Instagram. And I forgot to tell my Essential Vegan Desserts students, if you are on social media, if you are in Instagram, hashtag Essential Vegan Desserts, so I can find you, we can find each other, and oftentimes I share your desserts. So let's see, Mary has a question. How do you coat your baking pans to prevent sticking to the pan? I have a collection of decorative cake pans I'd like to use. That's a great question. So typically, I use parchment paper. I oil my cake pan, and then I fit the bottom with parchment. However, if you have up here, I have decorative cake pans. And here's a corn stick pan. It's adorable. It makes the cutest corn muffins, but in the shape of corn. So in that case, I use a spray that is oil and flour, or you can make your own, but you really have to use that, and you really have to spray, 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 and then turn it over, and it shouldn't stick. If something isn't coming out of the pan after you make it, don't force it. In that case, I will either put it back into the oven for just a little bit, or more likely soak a kitchen towel in very hot water and put it over the bottom of the pan, not the cake part, and then it should come out. Melissa is asking, do I have a whole food plant-based favorite pumpkin glue and crust? Melissa, I don't know what pumpkin glue is, and I have a feeling that isn't what you meant to write, so just write it back in. Whole food plant-based crust. What I use there is, I don't try to make a rolled out pie crust, because the ones without any fat taste like cardboard. I have tried. So there I will use perhaps a cookie crust, or don't forget about the date and nut crusts, which you can just, any dried fruit in the food processor with some nuts till it sticks together in your hands, press it. And in terms of a whip, you could try a cashew whip or tofu whip. I don't know if you were on the live when we showed the recipe for the tofu ginger cream, but that would be nice. Hi, Anna Marie. Anna Marie says, we met at the Cooks and Books event in Wayne, and I've made a few recipes from your book. I'll put in a plug and say it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna Marie. It's nice to see you again. That was a lovely event at a bookstore called Main Point Books, and Chef Shar actually put it together for Les Dames d'Escoffier Philadelphia chapter. It was wonderful. So thank you. This is the book that Anna Marie purchased from me, and I will be using it. Victoria M. says, I have been experimenting with different types of flour and sugar when I bake, and wondering if there are any tips to use one over the other. For example, coconut, date, almond, etc. You bet. That is a whole separate live event, and I have probably done some. I want to remind everyone to go into the Rouxbe live events library and just search, because if you've signed up for this, you can look at other live events, you can watch them, or you can listen to them. Some of them, many of them, have been transcribed over into podcasts. And so there are enormous differences, Victoria, and we have units on all of this in Essential Vegan Desserts, because people forget that you have to learn about the different things. Coconut flour, for example, is very, very, very thirsty. You don't just take AP flour out of a recipe or whole wheat pastry flour out of a recipe and dump in another one. What I always suggest is you divide the recipe in half, maybe by a quarter. Instead of making a cake, make 2-3 muffins and see what happens. In terms of coconut sugar, it's coarse. You need to grind it first. And I like coconut sugar, but it has kind of a molasses taste. And if you're making a vanilla or a lemon cake, it's going to change not only the flavor, but the color. Date sugar does not dissolve at all in baked goods. So I sprinkle it on the top of something because it will burn. And almond flour is a wonderful flour to use. There's good fat in almond flour, so you can only switch up only so much. I have a cake, I think it's on my website. It's an orange almond olive oil cake. I started infusing the olive oil with rosemary, and it's based on an orange bundt that I make. and I decided to see what would happen if I took out some of the flour, some of the AP flour, and added a portion of almond flour. And it took me a few tries to get what I want. Of course, I cut the recipe down, but it's very nice. But absolutely, you have to get to know your ingredients, and the only way to do that is by learning about them and using them. Hi, Kathy. Um, Kathy says, making gluten-free pie crust or gluten-free puff pastry. Her gluten-free pie dough and other pastries never turn out as good as I hope. Well, gluten-free baking is just completely different. And that's where you have to start. I use Bob's Red Mill, gluten-free, it's called 1-to-1 all-purpose gluten-free baking flour. It's a mix, has some xanthan gum already in it. And I actually recently tried a different brand, it might have been Kinger. Didn't work the same. So there's that. I believe that there are, if you go to people who are really specialists in gluten-free baking, you might want to see if you can find a gluten-free pie crust that works. I've tried a lot of them. I am certain that there are some that are okay. I personally haven't found one that I like very much. So in that case, I would probably, what would I do? I would make a gluten-free cookie crust, maybe. Certainly not gluten-free puff pastry. Michael says Chef Shar shared a great sweet potato dessert in her last session. He's asking if I have any extraordinary sweet potato desserts to share and perhaps a non-traditional one to try out. I love sweet potatoes, all kinds of sweet potatoes. And, if you roast your sweet potatoes, the sugars caramelize and you don't need very much sugar at all. So that's half of it. One of our Rouxbe Plant Pro grads, her name is Andrea Corby Fine, and on Instagram, she has an Instagram account called Ingreened. And this weekend she did a holiday pop-up, which was fabulous. There was lots of good information and delicious lunch, but she made a sweet potato pie in a cookie crust that was really delicious. And what Andrea said was, instead of thinking pumpkin pie, she wanted to use less sweetener. If you've ever tasted pumpkin, it's not sweet. It actually doesn't taste super good, which is why in my pumpkin pie, I'm cooking the spices and the sweeteners into the pumpkin to make it taste good, until I decided yesterday to do this, which was fabulous. And she made a sweet potato pie using a base of a pumpkin filling, but with less sugar. And it was really good because sweet potatoes are going to be inherently sweeter. A non-traditional one, Michael, I have in my head to make a sweet potato pie using purple potatoes. I really like the taste of them. They're a little drier, so you might have to account for that than a garnet sweet potato, for example. I tend to steam them and then roast them. But I think that would be a wonderful non-traditional sweet potato pie. In fact, I'm going to try it. Asking, do you recommend making fruit pies with raw or pre-cooked fruit fillings? It depends, Regina, on the pie. I tend, with my apple pies, what did I used to call them? Mile high apple pie or something like that. I like to pre-cook some of the apples ahead, but always, always cool down your fruit fillings. And there are other fruit pies, cranberry pear, that I will cut the pieces small and use them uncooked. And let's see, Regina says, have you tried the Dandy's Marshmallow Fluff? I make oatmeal cream cookies with a filling made from the marshmallows. It's not easy to handle. I just got a jar of it, but I tasted the marshmallow fluff. This is that same brand, and I spelled it wrong. It's Dandees. I tasted it at a food show. It's delicious. It tastes like, I don't know, marshmallow fluff. I don't remember the brand from the old days with all the junk in it. This is not health food, but it is marshmallow fluff. And if, we're talking about treats here. So yeah, Regina, it tasted really, really good to me. And I think that would be a good thing to do. Hi, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie's having an open house in a few weeks to celebrate the spirit of Christmas in our historic village. You and Sharon invited. Thank you very much. That's so kind of you, Anne-Marie. What are some things I can make ahead? Freezer space is limited. I hear you on the freezer space is limited. When I remodeled my kitchen last year, I got a much bigger refrigerator and there's plenty of room in my freezer, but it depends. Last week, I did a book signing at Barnes & Noble with Ruth. No, I was thinking with Rose Berenbaum Levy. And some of you may know Rose, the goddess of baking, traditional baking. And she updated the Cake Bible after 35 years and actually put my vegan chocolate cake in the book, which was just a thrill. And I had to make a lot of cake. So Rose was sampling her cake and I was sampling these, and this just came right out of the freezer. They say it stays really moist. So a lot of my desserts, most of the desserts that I make can be frozen. If you're doing, I would do bars, I would do little pieces of cake like that, maybe some very small corn muffins are very nice. I like mini muffins. I really do. I really do. Cookies that you don't have to put in the freezer. You want to think about how you store cookies. If you have crisp cookies and you want them to stay crisp, you put them in a glass jar and you seal it really tight. I use food grade silica packets to keep things crispy. And then for other cookies, I will put them in a different kind of container so they stay that way. Thank you so much, Emery. Emery wants to know if I've used aquafaba powder, and I have, and I haven't liked it. And Melissa wants to know if I can share the pumpkin muffin recipe. The one in the course, I cannot share, but I think if you do a search or go to my website, francostigan.com, I suspect you're going to find the pumpkin muffin recipe, and it's super, super easy. Hi, Laura. This is our friend Laura, Plant Pro grad, Essential Vegan Desserts grad, and a fine artist who does magnificent work. And Laura is saying, I want to say how thankful I am for your pumpkin muffin recipe, a Thanksgiving staple in our house. Thank you, Laura. That's a really nice thing for you to say because Laura's a really good cook. Generally, if I have a bunch of people coming, what I will do is bake small pumpkin muffins and small, what I mean is mini. I have mini muffin pans, cornbread muffins, and serve that as people are kind of milling around with a cup of soup. And I find that really gets everything really cool. Karen wants to know, I'm so glad you asked this, Karen. Is there a way to make meringue cookies without egg whites? Well, yes, there is. It's called aquafaba. And what I'm showing you here is not a meringue cookie. It's more like a pavlova, but I made a lot of aquafaba. This is 2 weeks old. I made a lot of aquafaba recently, and I had some left over, and I don't know that you can see the dots in here, but I decided to add some burlap and barrel. What I add? A little bit of cardamom. It was delicious. And then I dehydrated it just the way I would a meringue cookie. So yes, You got to learn to use aquafaba and make yourself some meringue cookies. We teach that in Essential Vegan Desserts as well. You all, these were amazing, fabulous questions. Thank you so, so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I want to wish you all a happy, healthy holiday season. May you be with people that you love and food delicious. Don't knock yourselves out and just take care of yourselves, take care of each other. It's been a kind of an interesting time, and I appreciate every one of you. I hope I will see you in December for the next live event. Thank you all. Bye.